Great. By my clock, we're 10 after, so I think I will get us started unless I'm off. So I'm David Culler here at Berkeley and faculty director for the Sustainable Infrastructures program. So I want to welcome all of you and welcome the folks out there at the other campuses throughout Citrus, Davis, Merced, Santa Cruz. And like all Citrus Research Exchange talks, this is online and will be on YouTube. I'm supposed to mention to you all that the next application deadline for the Citrus Foundry is September 27th, and you can find more at citrusfoundry.org, and that the 2015-16 Big Ideas Contest is open with a deadline for pre-proposals on November 12th. Oh yeah, that happens to be my birthday, but that's not really relevant here. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Stuart Macmillan. The bio says that Stuart is a consulting professor at Stanford University and chief scientist at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'd say, in my experience, Stuart is the person that is most really driving systems notion of sustainable infrastructure, really looking out to really this infrastructure as a network, an ongoing and evolving network. We tend to carve it up in these independent stovepipes in a terribly utility-centric view of the world, but of course, you know, buildings are a part of the grid is a part of the buildings, the water system is a part of the grid, it consumes so much, so is the solar, so is the environment. Transportation is so much a part of that, especially as we move towards electric vehicles. Oh, by the way, none of that was important for itself. It's all important in that it does something for people. And Stuart has really been developing this concept of really a human-centered view on these things that 100 and some years ago we called a utility, and we've really had it completely backwards. So with that, let me hand it over, and you're in for a treat.
Thank you. First, let me know if you can hear me okay. Good? So perfect setup. We have been building global energy infrastructure for well over a century, and it kind of works, and we've all got used to turning lights on, and it just happens. It's very reliable. They have a goal of making it very efficient, and then something happened. We had another set of goals come in play, right, that changed the world quite differently. And so when we start adding in new constraints to what this system should do, it becomes very difficult, right, for it to exist as it did in the old days. And it becomes even more interesting in terms of the services it provides. And so we'll just jump in. I'm hoping this will be a fun talk. This is not my secret agenda for this one, is that somebody in their research will sort of catch and latch onto some of this and take it far further than I would ever do. So we look at traditional energy systems, and everyone has an eye into it, right? And so you'll be talking to different researchers all over the globe, and you'll say, you know, what are you doing? And they'll be looking at generation, or they'll be looking at renewable resources, or they'll be looking at storage on the grid, or they're looking at transmission and distribution. Some will come in and look at a home, the built environment, and say, is this an efficient home, and what can we do to improve that? Some will start looking a little bit further up the food chain. Well, also the car sitting in your garage, whether it's electric or not. Further up the food chain, they'll look at communities. And so community solar, community storage, and so on. Further up the food chain, you have cities, and there's a lot of attention being given to making cities sustainable. Regions. And then if it's power you're talking about, we bump into these grid issues about which club you're in, right? We have the Western Interconnect for us. We have ERCOT and the South. And we have different groups, right, concerned. And if you plop this globally, you have sort of at the continental level. So in Europe, they talk about trading electrons across the continent, right? And so this plays at all different levels. And depending who you talk to, they have very different notions of what it means to be an energy system. This is a tremendously interesting field. Very bright people are trying to work on this. And it's not just about electrons. It's not just about power. It's about thermal systems. We don't do it as much in this country, but travel elsewhere and they look at thermal systems, whether it's geothermal systems or community heat and power and so on. And so that's a big factor in what's happening. You'll look at other systems, and they also look at fuel. So we don't think about these mixing, and they happen traditionally in the past 100 years. But the mix over of transportation and electricity, right, alternate fuels, or hydrogen for vehicles, it gets a little dicier than it had been before. So we look at these, and it becomes even more interesting, which I think is of particular importance to many people right now, is people are busy putting this thing on top, right, of this energy system, this thing on top that's going to fix everything, right? This cyber layer, right, where we have sensors all over the place, we have new control systems and so on, which is fantastic. It's just that a lot of the things in the system, right, work like this. That's switching it off. It's not on your phone. It's not some central control. So you're working with structures that are in various stages, right, of that sort of evolution. And so it becomes even more complicated. So if you look at energy systems, being reliable, right, for most people was the most important thing. Can I get it when I need it? Then we talked about efficient. Can I get it at a reasonable price? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? Accessibility is still one we're working on, right, globally. So when you think about connecting the last billion people on the planet, right, with power to read, right, stay warm, to cook, we're still working that one. Resilient is one that's becoming more important, right, as people are concerned, not only of the core infrastructure, right, and the evidence would be things like, the blackout in the Northeast, some small thing triggers and connects and all other things go wrong. And as a result of that, you don't sit back and kind of watch it. Trucks roll and people phone in, right? And they use that to help troubleshoot. And they still have all these other great tools, but it's still really archaic. The last one we kind of shuffled in here, and it's the catch-all for all things, sustainable. Some people call it low carbon, some people call it renewable resource. Whatever your particular slice of life, right, how you view this, it's fine. But we're trying to make these so they're better than something else. And we have all kinds of policy, we have all kinds of incentives, we have all kinds of things we're building to try and move our energy systems globally to ones that are more sustainable and more resilient are the two last problems we're trying to do. Resilient gets into conversations of what if somebody did X, right, to the grid? What if there was a cyber attack? So all of these things have become massively important. And so underneath the hood, think about this system that's, some version of, between 0 and 100 years old, connected together, and ran very smoothly in the past. So let's jump on top of this one here. So what does this new world look like going forward? So energy in a 4D world. One thing that's happening is, as a result of people jumping on this, there's been huge innovation, material science, solar efficiency, solar panels, wind blades, turbines, the strength, the size of them, right? Many of these technologies are still in their early stages and going through their growth curve, but they're starting to impact what's happening. And what we're seeing now is the early part of the cycle of this global transformation of energy systems. So if you think about Tesla, you can talk about them as a business play that's innovative, disruptive, bypassing the dealers. Electric motor, charging systems and the need for new infrastructure, right? All of those things, if nothing else, if that company disappeared tomorrow, you've already started the conversation and people are already thinking about what they might do next. Clearly, sensors has been a very big part of all that's going on. We couldn't do this, right? We can still compute things, but if we didn't have low cost, right, low power, inexpensive sensors to keep track of all these things, we wouldn't be having the same conversation that we have today about this sort of massive microcontrol of this very, very complex system. Storage is an interesting one. So forget about the size of storage, whether it's in your watch or in your garage or where it happens to be. Just the fact that you can time shift storage. Think about that. If I can shift when I use electrons, and I can keep some locally, and locally might be on your body, locally might be in your home, locally might be at the community level, or grid storage, right? All of those work on this one here. We also have people just messing with the system, right? The economics of the system. And so when you come in and push aside something that used to be there very comfortable, and the system had been built out, right, on that previous model, things get a little dicey. And so Amazon has come in and helped displace brick and mortar, and it's changed the way many of us buy stuff and how it gets delivered to you, right? You're not jumping in a car. Uber is in the middle of a play, and again, it's a perfect example. Whether they disappeared tomorrow or not, it wouldn't make any difference. The riots in the street in Paris, in London, in Dublin, just go through the disruptive forces that they've let in play. And people are thinking about things differently. And as a result, you're having a whole bunch of things happen, right, with the conventional systems, right? They have apps that look more like an Uber app, right, to call up a cab. And so however that plays out, and it's very early in the stages of the evolution, things are going on sort of at the value chain and disintermediation. The thing that gets probably most attention is the physical stuff that's going into the grid, right? And so my apologies for a tiny picture, but pretend that's the grid. And it has the usual stuff you suspect, right? There's a coal plant in there. There's a gas-powered turbine, right, generating electricity. There's transmission lines. There's all this stuff. And then we came along because of these other goals that we had, and we started layering stuff on top. We haven't retired all that much. We've laid stuff on top. And so now we have things like storage, right, in your garage. We have rooftop solar, right? And these things, not necessarily in the individual level, right, but in the aggregate, can very much change the shape and direction of what needs to be produced, right? So utilities have a big interest in this. A lot of other people have big interests, but there be one of them. The last thing I wanted to focus on, and really is the core for today's conversation, is about who cares, right? So you have energy systems. They were old. They're getting better. We're putting new technology in there. It's getting much better than it was before. The only reason we have these is to deliver services. And I'll be, focus on people at this point here. Services to people, right? Those things you get. You get warm, you get cold, you get from A to B. All of those things are a part of it. So if you forget for a moment that in the earlier picture we had here, this little human being sitting at the front, that just flips, right? And so the new line of reasoning is, well, what if that person, that individual, not even collective, was the center of the universe, and you were planning these systems for that individual? So you'd have all the things that go on in energy systems, but you also have all those services that we're layering on top, right? Whether it be calling up Uber or what have you. You have these sort of two systems in play. So as the energy system is going through this transformation and is looking to reach across from something that's not a lookup table that represents the average human being, or a software simulation of what human beings in general should do, or pick something more sophisticated than that, it's looking for things that would actually drive back into the energy system to help tune it, just as you might for a building if you actually had biometrics and behavioral and belief system information on everyone who occupied a building, right? And so these things kind of bump into each other in a nice way. And the conversation we'll have today is all about services. So forget the fact all these things are going through a massive transformation. We're talking today about the services transformation that are enabled by energy systems. And another point is that the energy systems that we speak about today are in the broadest possible sense, right? So an energy system isn't just the power plant. It's water, right? It's all part of the energy system. It's land, right? It's thermal systems. It's all those things that you need to put in place to be able to do what you need to do. So let's jump into it. So we arbitrarily invented 4 quadrants because 4 is a nice number, and it made life simpler for us. But you could dice this any way you like, right? And so what we did for us is to look at the quality of life services that are enabled, right, by energy systems. And if you look at the top left side, it's the mobility section. So think through all the ways you physically get from A to B, right? And then add on to that all the ways you don't have to get from A to B, right? And that's the mobility farm. So it has to do with your biking, your walking. And the truth is, if you look globally today, people have a lot more options. Because we're creatures of habit, we tend to do the same things, right? Whether you're stuck with your bike or you're wedded the hip to your car or whatever, people tend to bring those things along with them, right? And so it's not easy for us to sort of migrate to a new path right? A new direction as we were getting from A to B. And I'll go much more on that later. Down a little bit from that is connectivity, and that's that catch-all for all of those things that happen to you, right? And they're more cognitive, and so you're getting educated, you're watching a movie, you're talking to somebody, and you know more better than most people the end-to-end energy entailment of data centers globally, right? The telecommunication equipment, that's sort of the barrier that conveys that stuff back and forth. The third one is goods, and that's in the broadest sense also. So it's not just you buying goods, right, online. Goods is the manufacture of goods, your purchase of them, the shipping of them to you, repairing them, how you use them, and how you dispose of them, right? So if you look at those services around a human being, that kind of captures that point. And the last one is comfort, which I think is the easiest one. So the easiest one. So those things that energy systems enable and the energy services that they enable do to make you warm or cold or comfortable, have the lighting properly, have the noise level down, whatever it happens to be. On the comfort side, the other twist on this one here, it's not just about you being in a building or being in your car or being in your office or being wherever, right? Comfort could be all of those things for you, right? So if you take for, seriously the notion of an individual, it's basically you walking through time and space, moving into different environments, and how are you preserving your comfort? It's going to be different in each of these environments, but it would be nice to have something that's looking out for you, right, as you go from A to B. Here are some trivial sort of embryonic examples of energy-enabled services available today. So this is, early generation. So if you look at the first one, it's Nest, right? Simple one. I'm back in town. My heat, depending on who you are, either up or down to 68, right? And can you take care of that for me? So you have infrastructure laid on top of your HVAC system, layered on the PG&E or whoever is delivering electricity and or gas to your home. That's the end-to-end infrastructure. And the new piece is obviously IT that enables this one here. So if you think about every service that comes to you as having those components of somebody wants something, there's a service, right, that's been generated, the IT infrastructure to help communicate, enable that, right, control, and then the energy infrastructure behind the scenes, spoken broadly. A second one is Uber. Uber, same thing, and so, when we're finding sort of globally, it's not just Uber, it's every other person here, people are having far more choices, and they're thinking about how they get from A to B. It used to be they hung on to whatever their safety net was, their car, their bike, their whatever it happened to be. And now you can make different choices. You can walk and say, if it's raining or it's dark or I feel unsafe or whatever, I'll call up, right, a service and get back home, right? And swap Uber for any other combination, right, of you getting from A to B. And you have sort of an idea of this free-for-all that's going on globally right now in terms of providing new services for personal mobility. The next one is more along this IT infrastructure part, questions we ask. And so we imagine a world where we look stuff up, then we watch stuff. That was more energy intensive. And now if we move to the next level, we're asking questions all the time, and there's actual real work to do behind the scenes, right? And they're tracking me all day, and they know about my heart rate, and they know about all kinds of things. It's a slightly different story. And so we have the first generation of these things kind of poking at us. Each of them have different energy infrastructure. Some of them are very traditional, and some of them are very clean, or what we would consider more sustainable. So when you look to typically the large 4 or 5 folks who have large data centers, they have done an amazing job of trying to power those data centers with clean electrons. They can do anything from buy a wind farm, sell it back to a utility, take the RECs associated with the wind farm, and have the utility does what it can do best, right? Run these things on an ongoing basis. And so they get their clean electrons in the community in which they're operating, right? And still be able to sort of grow and not have the pushback and so on. So another example of this one here. Amazon is also an interesting one. How do things get delivered? So I don't know how many people in here do Amazon Prime or whatever system you order. It seems that just getting it to you right this second is a really big deal for some people. I personally don't care sometimes. If I'm away, it doesn't make any difference. It's on my doorstep for a week, right? But we have these things where we're pushing stuff to get to us quicker, faster, all kinds of things. And there's huge energy entailment about how these things get there, whether it be by FedEx or Amazon cutting a deal with USPS and having them show up, right, in off hours, whether it comes by drone, whether it comes by somebody's personal car who just has some time and wants to make a little money and will deliver that to you, whatever it happens to be. So there's kind of a free-for-all going on with the delivering of things, whether it be food, groceries, you, your children, what have you. Lots of interesting stuff. And so these are very crude first generation. So an observation you could have with these is they're fairly siloed, right? You get into their camp and you kind of hang out, and if they build an ecosystem, you're part of that ecosystem and so on. But it's very interesting to sort of think through, and you'll have your own examples. I've left out all the dozens of startups, right, in the space doing great stuff, and so, just keep that in mind. So what about tomorrow's, right, services? So we have what's being built out today globally is an energy system where we kind of get it and we're trying to improve on it. And we do need information for how people use it. People use it through services. And so if you're using it through services, we need to also think about how those are designed. The nice part with the services, there are a lot that are fairly mature, but most of them are brand new, right? Most of the interesting services are brand new. We could shape them in many different directions. So if you look at Shankara, you'll look at maybe the 5 global people who are leading the way for maps and giving you directions to places and so on. Each of them have their own play about how they support that, right, and what their agenda is and so on. And when I'm looking at getting from A to B, I might be interested in what the weather looks like, so I might be interested in a dark sky forecast at my exact location in the next 20 minutes, right, to be able to tell me whether I should be walking, biking, or what have you. But we have all combinations at play. And so if we look at this one here, on the left side is the old energy system. Huge, great work going on, trying to really understand what we have, how that should be improved, right? How we operate it in a better way, and how we would design new aspects of it. So if you're in a country where you're building out massive new infrastructure, the story looks very different than if you are in a country that has things that look like they're closer to 100 years old than 0 years old, right? On the flip side, we have the energy services we talked about. And so what's the interplay? The energy services should help improve the operation and the design of energy systems big time. So decode energy systems, transportation systems, the power system, the grid, go through all the list of things we sort of included in that camp. If we're not feeding back stuff through the loop, right, how do these things get any better than just some person's idea at time Y, right, about how they should operate, right? The other tricky part about human beings is they're not these deterministic machines, right? I don't give the same answer every time. Right? You catch me at a particular time and I'll want this, and the next time I'll want that. And try and figure out why. I can't. Maybe you could, watching my behavior for a long period of time. But we have all these things that seem kind of random. And if we try and do this in the aggregate, like if you have millions of people, it's a very different story. If you're talking about an individual and you're trying to target them, right, much, much harder. So lots of room for moving back and forth here. So the same thing, same circle around for energy services or energy-enabled services. If you want to improve the design, we're much earlier in the cycle about that, so have at it, right? Lots of opportunity there. So I'm going to talk very, very briefly about a group that is trying to poke at this. And they've been running lots of experiments in different dimensions and so on, but I'll pick 3 wildly different ones to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that might happen so that we understand, right, what's happening with these services. Not that we want to build them and go into business and make it happen, but that we understand sort of what they're really doing. For example, I get a lot of email that tells me this new improvement is a wonderful thing and I should really love it. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? I certainly didn't see a research paper, right? Studying me or anybody around me, right? Telling me that that was a great thing to do. So the first one is C-suite. That has to do with comfort. Next one is Consumer X, and that in particular was focusing on purchase behavior. And Commuter X, which is very similar, except much bigger tie back to the system than the work Shankar is doing. And we're collaborating together on that. So let's just jump in. So you see the box in there? That is an empty box, and behind it is a massive amount of HVAC, lighting, all kinds of control systems that can change the environment very, very quickly, right? So you can have a very cold, a very windy, a very high lit, low lit, whatever you want to do. You can do humidity change and so on. So why is that important? It's important because we really don't understand as well as we could about what the range is for individuals, right, over different times and contexts about what they would give up, right? And so we're finding, even in the earliest research, is people have this broad range in which they claim they're wonderful and life is going great. So remember the word belief, and we'll come back to it later, right? There are people who come in, and we see it tends to be a male thing, grind the environment to be as cold as humanly possible, and stick with that through the experiment. And you know, maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not. But every time somebody does something, right, has a tolerance for things that could be out of the normal band, right, that could be an opportunity for the energy system, right, to take advantage of that. Or it could be a new load in which they have to compensate for that. So this one's fairly, it's precise control of variables. You can look at how individuals in this environment, and in this case here, in the early experiments, they were sitting down, actually doing cognitive tasks, but there's no reason you can have them do physical tasks, right, and monitor them and have stuff fed back. There's a data acquisition system that gathers all this and rolls it back and so on. So one other part with this would feed into, if you look at sort of that chain we talked about of an individual in a bubble, right? So this is an instance of a bubble. Right? It's a fake environment with high precision control of what it's like. And you can vary that, and you can use some of that to help inform what you might do for the larger building, for the campus, for the community. You might even do that for a vehicle. You might even think about changing those variables in ways that would support an individual in an extreme environment. So if I was fighting wildfires and I needed a personal energy system with me, right, to be able to do what I'm doing, and I needed information and I needed all kinds of stuff and so on, you could see that kind of personal, physical, right, physically personal bubble, right, tying the system that also ties into these very large-scale ones that we talked about. This is what it looks like. So this is one half. The other is built out a little bit differently. Lots of imaging, lots of sensor stuff, and so on. And the long and short of this one here is you could put anything you want in here. It doesn't make any difference. It's a box, right? And it connects back to data acquisition systems and so on. But think through the range of experiments you could connect to that might inform this great new service you're thinking about that you just totally believe is going to be the best thing humanly possible for people, right? This might be a way of helping understand how it's really working for people and what that interperson, right, difference looks like as they use the system and how you might accommodate that. So this is the second one, the second category, very, very different than the first one. This one here is essentially informing people at the point of decision making. The example here is it's a grocery store. It's the largest grocery store in America. And they set out camp up front. And when you came in and signed up for the experiment, you got a phone that did augmented reality over sections of things that were sold in the store. So when you came in, you had all kinds of information about carbon footprint, all kinds of things that aren't on the back of a cereal box or water, right? And so the question there was just, it was a sample. It was going through and saying, well, do people care, right? And would they behave differently? So it's unlikely that I would carry one of these with me, right, and do this for everything. But we do know that imaging stuff has gotten very, very good. So we can do this. It's amazing how well this worked for random water, random cereals, random anything, right, to identify what it was. And it was very easy to overlay this new track of information that we thought might be important to people. So rather than go through too much on this one here, let's just jump ahead a little bit to this here. So the only thing you'd have to do in this one here is some people came through And they were asked to do two different things. They were given some money, and they were asked to go buy a couple of things, right? One was in a cereal category, one was in water. Cereals are highly differentiated, right? Parents care, kids care about sugar content, all kinds of things, in good and bad ways, right? Picking it back and forth. And so those tended to be very important in the selection of these. So if you told somebody in this particular early study that carbon was so much better for one than the other, or some other aspect of it, the end-to-end footprint of this product, they didn't pay that much attention to it, quite frankly. And so the one to watch is the first one, carbon, no big deal, it's random almost, right, versus sugar, right? So look at the second one, water. So if you go into a supermarket, and I hope you don't do this, but if you go in and you have to buy water, that you have a wide selection of water from Fiji and melted ice, glacier water, and you'll go to Whole Foods and they'll have water from Italy, right? That's the house brand, by the way, bottled in there, shipped to you. Thank you very much. And so when you think about this, and the price varies a little bit, but it's not huge, right? And you sort of think for a second and ask yourself, I wonder how people think about this when they go through and make a purchase decision about things like that. And the answer is, water's water for most people. They'll look at the bottle size, they'll look whether it breaks, they'll look at the cap. Some people like a little thing on top so you can drink from it. There are small things like this one here. But the funny part is they cared about the carbon footprint of water. Not so much, these are early small end results, right? But it's kind of interesting that you get that kind of variance. So what is it about these various products and how people think about them? What would it look like if you could inform product purchase? There would be a feedback loop for the manufacturers to improve, right, a product, the delivery of the product, the actual makeup of the product, and so on. And so we're missing a whole bunch of those market signals. We're missing a lot of stuff in that loop. And having said that, it's unclear all of us will be doing this with either a headset or walking around the store like this. But it's a very easy way, right, to have those studies in the wild, right, about how people make those choices. You could do the same thing for all other aspects of that cycle of goods. It would be an interesting thing to do. So research opportunities in here, I always come through and it's like, well, what are we trying to do? We're trying to understand what's going on, first of all, to be perfectly honest, right? It's not like we're jumping to brand new control systems and we're going to design something, whatever. It's like, can we understand what's really happening here? Can we help people, right, the human being part, make a better decision? Not as defined by me, who would like them to read this ad on the left side, right? But as they have described what they value, right? What's important to them. So it'll be different for different people, this one here. So now we've pumped up to Consumer X. I'll go quickly through this one here. Builds on, and thank you very much to Shankar for some of her core work through here. And we asked a slightly different question, and that was, what could you, if you knew a lot, right, about how people are deciding to make mobility choices, take a bus, walk, bike, car, whatever it happens to be, right? How could you use that information to inform local and larger scale transportation, right, systems or mobility systems and so on? And so we're doing this sort of at a new scale. It works really well if you have large N, lots of people doing it, right? And there are a lot of people interested in this space, but for a different reason, not to get you from A to B necessarily the fastest or the most efficient or keep you smiling and so on, but it's a way of marketing to you. It's a way of doing lots of things, and that's perfectly okay, right? But just be aware that that is part of the agenda. And we have information from all over. We have information of your email, your calendar, the local weather, right? So ultra local weather, dark sky stuff, right? What you've done in the past. I mean, you just gather information in different ways, and it gets to a point where it's creepy, right? It's downright creepy. It's not like, oh, great, you're helping me. It's like now trust kicks in, right? Who's doing this? Why are they doing it? What control do I have over it, and so on. So certainly, as you go through and do these, right, and all the services, and we gave examples of some of the embryonic ones earlier on, you get to a point and you're asking yourself, is this camera, is this motion sensor, is this all these things that are living next to me, right, serving me, or do they have other purposes in mind? And sometimes it's both. This is a snippet. This was actually an intern. I'll give full credit, right, to this one here. So when we look at this one here, we went through the problem of saying, well, at the core, how do we represent all these various options that people have? So the simple decode here is base would be that big thing you do in your way. So pretend you're going to work as your base thing, right, in terms of mobility. Then you might go to visit a client, and then you might go to lunch as a sort of third loop through here. And so we're starting to use sort of these more formal representations for all the various things that someone can do. But more importantly, how do you throw out ones that don't make sense? If an answer came back to me and I had 52 options, and the combination of all those options through my day, it just wouldn't happen. The other thing to do is don't make this just about one thing that you have through the day. It's about all those decisions. It might be a day, it might be a week, it might be whatever. The truth is, and you folks have identified this early, is it's probably most important to concentrate on those habits that are highly, pick the value you want underneath. For me, it's energy intensity, right? But pick those things, those habits that you're doing all the time that could be somehow informed, improved, that if you just made one flip, locked it in, right? Little nudge, little lock in, that you have that for most of the rest of your life, right? And so we are creatures of habit. We really do lock into these things. And so we don't know the answer on this front here. But we know that it is interesting in terms of watching. And we do know that we have lots of ways of sort of keeping score on what's happening here. Which brings me to the next part is that if you go and look at the literature in this space historically, most of the literature is stuck in the top left corner under beliefs, right, and informing beliefs. So let me say what that means. So if you look at services research, they were typically small n, small sample size. They ran for a fairly short period of time. Great studies, very smart people. This is good research, stuff to build on top of. And it also asked people, how does that feel? How's it going for you, right? As opposed to watching their behavior and say, I'll never do that again, right? Or as opposed to watching their biometrics and they're driving along the LA freeway saying, I love my car, I love driving, I love it, I love it. Their blood pressure is spiking, their heart rate spiking, they're sweating from the galvanic sensors and so on. It's not consistent, right? And so it may be great, you may love it, but you may have a shorter life than some others, right? And so you can think about looking at this stuff from a much broader perspective. And so beliefs is the easy one. You just ask people. You can use Amazon Mechanical Turk within an hour or two. You get 500 people back on some random topic that you have, right? And start looking at that. So it's fairly easy to just ask. We know that people tell you things that you tend to want to hear the person on the other side. And so if I'm sitting out and having somebody enter into a study, right, and ask them a question about, did you really love this virtual reality monitor and going through it? And say, yeah, it's the greatest. Would you use it? Yeah, of course I would use it, and so on. But we don't know, right? We have that feedback. So better would be to watch their behavior, have the beliefs, watch behavior. And we know we can watch behavior fairly closely. And we know we have to do it in a way that respects the privacy and security and all kinds of things here, which is a big deal. And then we also have the biometrics, right? So if you sort of pull the whole chain together, right, your beliefs, the behaviors you have. So in comfort is an easy example. Someone's telling you the room's great and it's wonderful, and they're sitting at the chair and they're wiggling around and they're doing all kinds of stuff. Their behavior tells me something different. And if I do a thermal imaging of them, it tells me something different. All their extremities are freezing, right? And if I do the biometrics, right, if stuff is spiking left to right. So the combination of those, not for everything, but for some things, becomes a very important thing for you to incorporate, right? So your engineers, your computer scientists, your material science, your all kinds of things and so on. This is basically saying when you sort of look at an end-to-end solution, right, the larger system, and there are people at the end through here, right, there are ways to kind of figure out when you're designing this, right, whether you could change something here, whether you could tune it, whether you could tune it for an individual, whether you could use machine learning so over a period of time for your individual. So when they get in their car, they kind of have stuff that's set their way, right, as opposed to tune it back and forth, knows that it's them, and so on. So that's along the top part. Along the treatment part, you can inform people, you can recommend things, or you can just do it, right? So I can inform, which is kind of like education. I'm telling you the facts, and you're processing the facts, and it's up to you to make the call, right? I can recommend, which is more typical of what we see in most services today, right? When Google comes back with the routing, they're not going through 42. They've got, this is the default, and by the way, there's 2 others that might be of interest to you, right? And you can play with those, but for the most part, you get a very limited list, and you select among those and so on. Or you could just have agents or assistants act on your behalf if you trust them, and if they have your interest at heart, right? Just do it. And those tie more into habits that we talked about before, things you can do on a fairly routine basis that you're just very comfortable. And you would recognize if it flipped out of the pattern, right? You would be able to catch it and override it. But for the most part, that combination of things, and there's a whole bunch of others, right, become kind of interesting to look at. And along the bottom part is, when do you do all this stuff? Do I do stuff to you before, the week before, the minute before, whatever it happens to be? Do I try and give you this, right, whatever it is, magic information, options, acting on your behalf, right at that point where you're making a decision, where you're doing something? Or do I come back a week later and tell you, look, here's your calendar for the week, and here are the 4 places where you were just spinning, right? You have this goal you want to exercise, but you spent all your time in your car, or you didn't get, you had to knock off this one here. Whatever it happens to be, you look back at sort of a pattern of things and say, why is that not, right, what I really intended? So research opportunities, there's 3 sort of up level through here. You can improve the individual quality of life services. You can improve the system, right? And you can do this tuning thing that goes on, where there's machine learning, so you have a more accurate model, a validated model of what's really going on. Or you can think about people being slightly random, and it's adapting to new interests and goals they have, right? But at any point, it clearly is these things are migrating in different places and so on. So the last thing I'll leave you with is this, right? And so I know, because I spent a long time before this looking at the energy system thing, so I got very practiced in having glasses on like this, right? Looking through all those things that you could fix, right? And so we flipped it a little bit. If you look at it through an individual, they're interested in things that are much different than that short list of tuning the energy system. They might be interested in their health. But maybe a proxy for health is exercise. And maybe a proxy for exercise is walking and biking as opposed to driving your car, right? And so these things can connect back and forth. Values that people have are non-deterministic, at least as we understand today. We don't fully get why. They might answer one way in one context and another, and maybe it gets better, but that's life as we know it today. And aggregation creates value for the system. And so that one is, if you could figure out when people don't care much about a give that they can have on this side here, and you could use that as part of your system, whether it be an energy system or what have you, that's a good thing. And there's a whole field on this in simple things for power and demand response, right? And so you have groups like O-Power, you have NEST, you have all these groups looking to see who cares whether their lights are on or their air conditioning is on or whatever, and who would be willing to give up, right, some of that use at a particular point in time to benefit the larger system. The last thing I want to leave you with is, even if you're a fundamental materials scientist, right, or a computer scientist or an engineer or an architect or what have you, think about on these complex systems that you at least befriend somebody, right, who can help close the end-to-end loop, right? Somebody who is not you, right? So if you're a computer scientist, look for somebody who's a behavioral economist. Look for somebody who's not you to be part of your club as you think through your research, right, about how this whole system really works. And that thing that you're inventing at some point in this whole system, whether it be at the fundamental storage technology or all the way to the end to some new app and service that you're creating, right? Think about the whole chain from end to end as you move through so that you can actually, with some confidence, say that you're doing some good things, right? Some good stuff is happening. So rich test bed's always kind of interesting. It's tough right now. It's getting easier. But you getting access to AT&T, apparently, this morning had the largest database of anybody, right? Going to this one here, not getting so much access to it. It turns out the utilities in California are under a mandate to, especially for research purposes, open up data streams, right, to you, and you can apply for that, and there actually is an ombudsman, a person you go through, and so on, so it's much easier. But do try and find somewhere, somehow. You have that here with your campus, but you can have it at different scales in a larger community, and so on. Get somebody who's not like you. Get feedback loops in the system, right? Somehow get your belief, whatever you thought was wonderful here, connected to some reality, either before or after it, right, to inform whether that's working for you. Also think about, we instrument stuff like crazy and so on. Our campus, we have a large amount of sensors and data coming in. And I would be disingenuous if I told you that that data and all those sensors were used to their maximum benefit all the time. So the flip question is, when you ship these things, what is the absolute least amount of data? What is the absolute least amount of information and infrastructure you need to make this system work? It clearly is not these massively streams and sensors and so on that we use early in the cycle. And then end-to-end analysis and trust. You've got to have people in the system, if you're talking about them, trust what's going on. So that's it. Thank you very much.
So don't go away, Stuart. We have time for a few questions, both inside and outside. I'm going to try this just open to questions, and let's repeat them for the folks that are not here. It's faster than passing this silly microphone around. So questions for Stuart? Please.
Question about how this all relates back to NREL. So NREL is really well known as technology developers of widgets, solar cells, fuel cells, biogas. What you're talking about here is market systems thinking, and that's something that in general NREL is not known for. What's been your biggest challenge in your role at NREL in trying to
what a great question.
Change that ship?
So you're absolutely right. So the feed into this was several years back. 3 of us went undercover and started some of the energy systems work that's going on, right? So we said, we make great widgets. We make, solar cells, wind stuff, and so on. These are all pieces that fit in. And the question was, that's great. This stuff is catching on. Other people are doing it. What happens what if it gets real, right? And that was the driver for the systems work. The driver for the services work is that next step, right? It's like, okay, you got a system that's kind of working. There's lots of people globally working on improving the systems, right? Including us. And the next one was, and we did the same thing. 3 of us went off and started something new. What if you took as the point of view the individual? Now, having said that, there is a part of NREL that you may be less familiar with, is on the analysis side, that has been all about, right, the techno-economic analysis of these systems, the pricing, the incentives, all kinds of things like that. And that's been in place for a long time. And so that sort of builds on this, but quite frankly, a lot of this stuff is new.
I guess the question is, why you as opposed to somebody else? I get that if you're testing wind turbines, there's only one blade vendor in the country, right? It's a huge accomplishment. But to build an app and send it to the grocery store, what is such a large barrier to entry?
So the question is straightforward, and the answer is extremely simple, right? If you looked at the energy consequences of most of the services that we have, whether it's a data center or moving track globally, it's huge, and it's one of the biggest problems we have. And so we can have new widgets, we can develop new technology, new material sciences, all kinds of things. But we also recognize if we get people to shape things differently, think about things differently, choose differently, that would also have a massive impact on this energy system. We knew it could inform the design of this new build-out of energy systems globally, right, just by knowing kind of what people are doing. But we also know that it could also improve the kind of services that get generated. They're not in the business of trying to knock out the next great app. If you notice, the focus had been on the research part, trying to understand what works, right? Does that make sense? Good.
Other questions?
I'll get this one, and please, go ahead. And also, it seems like you're thinking that you could also build some kind of frameworks that other people can use in order to make change that is more socially
You're so
motivated.
kind. Yes. So yeah, I mean, the end play is here is you could provide information, methods, tools, right, technologies that people could use to improve their things. So you're not trying to displace somebody who has a new cool app or a new service, but you would have tools to help you understand those better, right? Just in the same way, we don't build inverters, but we run the little box, right, contest with Google, right? A contest to invent a radically new, smaller inverter. And we are in there to make sure that the things you say are true, right? And how that might impact design. And so it's more of that inner cycle rather than the end part of being in the service business, right? Just like we're not really in the end all, we're not a utility, we're not any of those things, right? So it's trying to improve those.
And I guess a last question back here.
I enjoyed your talk very much, and one of the things I kept thinking about all during the talk was, gee, this sounds like a lot of people that basically have money, the middle class, they buy things, they don't worry too much about money. And yet I'm reminded, particularly by the visit of the Pope right now, that in fact there are some very strong moral arguments that are coming around. Particularly the Pope has made a big deal about climate change is not just a money issue, it's a moral issue. And in your research or in your thinking about energy services to the individual and an energy system that go with it, where do morals come in? Can you put that into your research design?
Loaded the camera off. So you have it profoundly good. So the group is very interested in this aspect of sort of the billion or so people left behind. It's not about getting Uber showing up so you could go off and do something cool necessarily, but it is getting those services. And so if you looked at, in a developing country, new mechanisms to maybe distributed generation, right, of energy, and how would you run that, right? How would you get that distributed, and what would be those services that you deliver to those groups and so on? And so we have a fairly large number of people who, for a long period of time, almost as long as the lab, been looking at developing countries. We're working closely with parts of China. We're working with small island nations and so on, remote areas, right, in Alaska, and areas where they don't have a grid pulling in all this wonderful stuff and so on, about how some of this stuff might work for a very different mindset, right? Delivering value to people. How do people get around? How do they get things? In this case, it could be food. It could have more to do with water, right, than necessarily the energy and right part of it and so on. And so that's a big part of what's happening. The first ones you're seeing are kind of some of the obvious, easy things to do in this society, right, for demonstrating this new layer of stuff and so on. I can talk to you offline